everyone.
Hi, we are Stefan and Julia from stephandjulia.eden, and this is the last video in a 7-part herb starting series.
In this video, we're going to recap everything we learned growing herbs over the last year, all the best practices and lessons learned. This video is really a compilation of an entire year of work, so we really hope you enjoy it, and we'll be going into depth on all the herbs we grew.
Yeah, this is also the first video that we're filming here in our new 10-acre property. All the other ones were filmed before at our suburban townhouse. To see how we transform this place into a self-sustaining homestead, click the bell and subscribe so you don't miss an episode.
We began this series by showing how we grew herbs in a hydroponic system and in a seed soil tray because we wanted to see which system worked better for which herbs. And so we're going to be discussing that here in this video, which herbs we think are better for which growing system.
In doing so, we learned a lot about the process of growing your own herbs from seed to harvest.
The first thing we learned was just about the process of getting your seeds. So first tip, don't order your seeds all from the same place if this is your first time growing herbs. Some companies can have seeds with a really low germination rate, and so you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. Order individual seed packets instead of bulk seed orders, and try ordering from a few different companies so at least some of your seeds do germinate.
That's right. Second tip we learned, don't assume that a heat pad will immediately increase your germination rate. We learned that some of the seeds for our herbs actually preferred a colder environment and they did better that way. So certain plants like Rosemary, Basil, they really liked the heat pad. However, the ones that did better in the cold were Chives, Coriander, Dill, Fennel, Lavender, Marjoram, Thyme, and Sage. They all did better in cold.
Yeah, that's a really important tip. Once you have your seeds, if you're not sure about the quality and you want to test it out, you can easily do so using the wet paper towel method, where you put your seeds in a wet paper towel, and if you see sprouts starting to form in the next couple of days, then you know your seeds are viable and you can throw them into soil and continue the growing process from there.
That's right. Another tip would be when you're preparing your seed tray with all the little pods, make sure the seed starter mix, you wet it first. That way it's a lot less messy and you can control where you're going to categorize all your different varieties. You start watering afterwards and you'll see it makes a mess and your seeds will actually start floating to individual other pods. It's easy to lose track.
Yeah, we made that mistake, so don't make that one. When watering, you can choose to top water or bottom water as your herbs are growing. We did continue top watering, which did carry some seeds away to other pods on our tray. And you have to be so delicate when top watering that way. And if you have a lot of trays to water, it can just be so much more efficient to bottom water. So we would recommend, if you can, trying out bottom watering.
As for the hydroponic system, growing things hydroponically is super fun and it's great for starting your seed. Certain of the plants actually did way better. That way they outshot all the others. However, the starting sprouts are very susceptible to mold and disease, just given how the system makes a little ecosystem right in there. And also your plant tends to outgrow the machine pretty quickly. So excellent for starting the sprout, but you got to move it to a pot under a lamp afterwards very quickly. So hydroponic system is not for maintaining your plant whatsoever.
Yeah, that was our experience anyhow. And all the herbs we grew, they did do well in soil. After all, that is the original way plants are meant to grow, in soil. But we did notice some of the herbs grew considerably faster in the hydroponic system. And so if speed is your top priority, the hydroponic system could be a good option. Depending on the herb, we'll get into that in this video.
That's right. We'll now get into what we learned about each individual herb. You can skip the chapters below to go to a specific. Let's start with basil. Basil can be grown in soil or hydroponically. We found that they both sprouted just as well, but it's a bit of a tricky plant, a tricky herb.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Like, we struggled getting our basil started. It can be really tricky to grow from seed, really sensitive. It needs the perfect growing conditions. For example, some of our basil got sunburned and we just found it never really recovered much after that.
You got to be careful. It's very finicky how close you're putting it to the grow lights and how much daylight you're giving it, because it sunburns pretty quickly, and sometimes it sunburned to the point where it was unrecoverable, even if you do trim it and clip it. So remember to grow extra basil. That's something we learned.
Yeah.
To take an account for that loss you're going to take.
Yeah, that's a really, really good tip. And if you just don't want to deal with that trouble at all, you could just buy basil seedlings from the garden center and not start your basil from seed at all, because it can be a bit tricky.
Funny thing about basil that we learned is it's a great companion for tomatoes. Why is it a companion for tomatoes?
Well, apparently rumor has it that it makes your tomatoes taste yummier. And certainly we've all had basil on a tomato sandwich, and that is just delicious. It's absolutely delicious. And so, I don't know if it's actually true that they grow well together, but, I could kind of see that working because a lot of tomatoes are indeterminate. They're very tall, and they would kind of shield the basil from getting sunburned. But our basil, once it got going in the garden, it did super well. It was growing big, and it became quite hardy once it was outside.
One of the tricks is just once your basil starts going, just watch it, learns its likes, its dislikes. It's a finicky plant. And you got to play with temperature, lighting, and wind, the environment that's around. Put a fan on it, some doesn't,
Yeah, and, we unfortunately did not have success with our basil in our hydroponic system. All of the hydroponic basil died for us. But we did do really well with some of our soil, our basil grown in soil trays. And we were able to end up with a couple basil plants, but we wish we had planted more because we did have some die from the sunburn. And so, yeah, we enjoyed eating our basil in a range of ways, making basil pesto. If you're preserving your basil for longer term use over the winter, a good way to do it is to make pesto and then freeze it, or just freeze the basil directly in ice cubes in your freezer.
That's right. So due to the lack of our experience, we can't conclude it 100% which is better to start basil from the hydroponic system or in the soil. All our hydroponic ones died. We don't know why. But over the course of years, we're going to make more and more of those plants, and we're going to learn more about it.
Once it starts getting cold, and basil being a tropical plant, it will start dying back, you'll see that your basil will bolt and produce flower heads and seeds on those flower heads. Collecting the seeds is really, really easy. We'll show you here a clip of how we collected our basil seeds at the end of the season.
Let's move on to thyme and oregano. We love these herbs. When starting the seeds, they are extremely tiny. If you remember, they're almost just like a little powder. So it's very easy to oversow in your trays or in the hydroponic systems. As soon as it comes up oversown, like in clusters or bunch, you got to get in there and start trimming them real quickly so they don't steal each other's nutrients, and you can have one successful plant at a time.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to thin them out in a soil-based tray, but we found it practically impossible to do that in a hydroponic pod. And so, unfortunately, our thyme, it got overcrowded in the hydroponic pod, and it wasn't able to recover when we tried to thin it out. But we found this wasn't really an issue in a soil tray. And so for these two, the thyme and the oregano, we would recommend soil-based gardening as opposed to hydroponic gardening for these two.
Luckily, once you get it started, it's a super tough plant. These things are unkillable. They're outside in the snow right now, waiting for the next season. They smell great. That's a big plus. I wish I could just hang it up higher. I love the smell of thyme and oregano.
Yeah, it's true. They're really hardy, and they're not too, high maintenance. Like, they don't require much watering. They prefer slightly drier conditions. So if you forget to water them once in a while, it's not a big deal. They also like to spread sideways, so they do need a good amount of room. They will get bigger. And so that's another reason that they might not do well in the hydroponic system that we had with the, narrow pods, because they want to go sideways.
I guess we learned how to pronounce these plants correctly too. We used to call it just thyme and oregano instead of those two, thyme and oregano.
Yeah, I think I still said thyme. I still say thyme sometimes. It should be thyme, like time and again.
Pretentious plant vocabulary. And
yeah, well, you might hear us say thyme or oregano. We just mix and match them, but apparently it should be thyme and oregano.
Okay, end of the season to preserve this plant, because right now it's out in the snow, but we did it in the fall. We get it into a cluster, to a bunch. We hung it upside down for 2 weeks, and then you strip it off with branch. That's the thyme and oregano, and you crush it in the mortar, and then we preserve it as a spice, a seasoning that we bottle.
Yeah, another way you can preserve over the winter is you can freeze thyme and oregano, and when it's frozen, it's great for throwing as sort of a flavor bomb into soups or stews. That's another great option. Alongside our thyme and oregano, we also grew marjoram, which is very similar to oregano. It's in the same family, but oregano has a stronger taste. And so we'd recommend putting the oregano if you're cooking with it at the beginning of the recipe, whereas marjoram you want to add at the end.
For thyme, oregano, and marjoram, we recommend the soil-based growth as opposed to hydroponic. It likes to grow sideways and stuff like that, so it doesn't like to be so much confined to that small pod in the hydroponic system.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about preserving your marjoram, it's another herb that can be easily dried by hanging it upside down, grinding it up, and putting it in a spice container. Remember also to label your containers so you can remember which one's marjoram and which one's oregano, because they're going to look real similar once they're dried in their containers.
Anise Hyssop. We didn't know much about this herb at all when we started, but we ended up liking it a lot. Pleasantly surprised. It's a very pretty plant. It's very ornamental. Tell us more.
Yeah, it has a sweet, mild, licoricey taste, but the leaves are really sweet. Like, they can be put on desserts, on smoothies. My nephews and nieces just loved coming to the backyard, and they'd always steal the leaves because it's like candy. Like, they're surprisingly sweet.
Very hardy plant. It's drought tolerant, so you can get away with not watering it for a while. The root system is huge, though. Like an iceberg, you only see the tip of the Anise Hyssop is what's on top of the ground. The root is quite extensively big. It might compete with the other herbs, so we recommended you plant it in a big pot.
Yeah, big pot. That's what we did for our anise, and it did very, very well there. It does like full sun, though, so we did have to move our anise at one point to the sun because it really wasn't doing well in the shade for us at first.
That's right. Yeah. What else? Compared to hydroponic growing, we didn't even try doing it hydroponically. We read that it was not recommended, but we have 100% proof that it works very well in soil. We grew it from the soil pods all the way up into bigger pots under the grow lights, and it did great.
Yeah, definitely. And at the end of the season, if you want to preserve your anise, you can dry it upside down and preserve it that way in a dried format. But you can also collect the seeds from the dried flowers, as we did, and we put those seeds into little bags so that we could then save them and hopefully grow a lot more anise next season.
That's right. Okay, so we're back the next day.
It is the next day. We had some issues with our mics and storage on our phone, and then batteries were dying. Anyway, it was a big mess. But
first the camera was dying, and then we charged that, and then the microphones were dying, and then the laptop was dying, and after all this was charged, then we ran out of storage space on the.
Anyway, all to say, it is the next day now, and we are back and ready to go, and we are going to try to continue this video.
Now we're on this 10-acre farm. It's fun. Look, we're already got our first power outage. Now we're having a blast. Full package deal.
That's right. We're officially in our first power outage. We do have a small generator that lets us charge our phones, and we're recording this on that phone that we can recharge. So, there's not much else we can do on the farm with the power outage going on.
Without further ado, I believe we were at Dill and Fennel.
That's right. Yes. Let's talk about dill and fennel. These are two very large plants. And they grow very, very quickly. They grow very well both hydroponically and in soil. We'd recommend either option. Definitely hydroponically, they grew faster, I would say.
Yeah. And in soil, you do the soil, make sure you put that seed pretty deep in there, actually, because it's got a long taproot. It's going to need a lot of space.
Yeah, you really want a pot or a container you're growing in to have a lot of room for that taproot. We were using 5-gallon grow bags for our dill, and both dill and fennel don't love to be transplanted. So try planting the seed in the final place they're going to live, so that you don't have to move them around after.
Furthermore, these two plants look almost exactly the same. When they come up, you can tell the difference over time. One of them is a little more bluish, the other one's more green. But they taste significantly different. Dill, we can use for everything. Very versatile, eh? We put that in fish, potatoes. You talked about, we can make grind it up into seasonings. It was super good. Fennel different. It's got like a black licorice taste. It was good to make pesto with. And also, when the whole plant was done, we harvested the bulb and breaded it and made roasted fennel ball. Of course, this kills the plant. It's the end of the plant. But
yeah, the bulb was really good though. And same with the fennel pesto. There was no licoricey flavor in the pesto or in the bulb when we roasted it in the oven. So yeah, those are definitely 2 recipes we would recommend. And we use dill for absolutely everything. We used it more than any other herb for our fish, for our potatoes. Yeah, really just love dill.
Okay, harvesting. You can harvest it very quickly. You can start eating it as it's growing. Never take away, here's a pro tip, never take away more than 1/3 of the plant at a time. That way it allows for regeneration growth to sustain itself while we...
Yeah, we were able to continue harvesting the dill and fennel numerous times. And for the fennel in particular, you need to collect quite a bit of fronds before you can make fennel pesto. And so you can keep collecting those fronds as long as you don't take more than 1/3 of the plant and freezing them. And then once you have enough in your freezer, you can make that pesto, for example. Yeah, so it's a great way to use that over and over again while it keeps growing back. At the end of the season, once you're ready to preserve your dill and fennel, there's a couple options. You can hang them upside down and dry them out, as we do with many other herbs, or you can freeze them in the freezer.
That's right, yeah. Preservation of the seeds. You want to replant that plant the next year. The first seeds that come from the middle of the stem.
The central stalk.
The central stalk, yeah. And the first ones that come up, you want to harvest those right away, and those are viable to start reseeding with. Because once it gets a little too much sun exposure, they become less and less capable of able to sprout.
That's viable, I guess.
And after a while, it's whole pack full of seeds, and they're all dried up from the sun. Those are pretty much good for making seasonings with only.
Yeah, so those first ones on the central stalk, you want to save for regrowing your dill and fennel. The others you can use for cooking. One last thing we want to talk about dill and fennel before we move on. If you are planning to collect the seeds from the central stalk to be able to grow your plants again in the future, just be aware that dill and fennel can cross-pollinate one another, which means, the seeds can end up with growing a hybrid plant that's somewhere between dill and fennel. I've heard mixed things about this online. Some people have said that they've grown dill and fennel numerous years in a row and they've never had this problem, and others have said that cross-pollination can be a concern. So we haven't tested it out ourselves with our seeds yet, but just something to keep in mind. If you're not planning to harvest the seeds to grow another year later, you don't need to worry about this at all. You can keep your dill and fennel near each other. It won't affect the current generation of plants.
Okay, getting into our parsley. We had both Italian parsley and curled parsley. I think we ended up with 2 of the Italian parsley plants and 1 of the curled. Italian was a little bit bigger, has a bigger root system. You need a bit more space for it. And the curled was a little more ornamental. The taste very, very similar. The texture is very different. Smaller, but more ornamental for the curled parsley.
Yeah, I think curled parsley has a bit more of an intense flavor, and that's the one that's traditionally used for like tabbouleh. But I mean, I love using the Italian parsley too in soups and in bread recipes. It's really, really yummy. We also, if you want to preserve your parsley after it's grown, it's a very hardy plant. It should last you quite well into the early winter. But at some point, you will want to preserve your parsley. And when you're ready, because it is a more moist plant, it can be a bit difficult to preserve through the upside down drying method. It might be a better plant to consider freezing instead.
That's right. Germination rate, they have a notoriously low germination rate. We didn't have that experience at all. Both in the hydroponic system and in the soil, it grew marvelously. And
it did.
As far as quantities, those 3 plants were plenty for us, right?
Yeah.
Found?
We had a good amount for us. It grew very well in both systems. It did grow a little faster hydroponically. So if speed is your priority, then that's certainly an option. But we really didn't have any challenges with our parsley.
None.
Yeah, it's quite a hardy plant for us. All right, let's talk about coriander or cilantro. Coriander is the name given to the seed that the plant produces at the end of its life, whereas cilantro is typically used to refer to the name of the leaves that people eat before the plant has bolted. And this is an interesting plant. I personally love the taste of fresh cilantro leaves, but there are people who genetically have a gene that causes them to hate the taste of coriander or cilantro. It makes it taste like soap for them. And certainly once the plant has bolted, I do taste the soapy taste and it tastes bad to me. But before it has bolted, I personally love the flavor.
I didn't like it. I thought it actually tasted like soap. I didn't like this plant. It was a pretty plant. It looked exactly like a parsley of some kind. But no, I didn't enjoy it. But here's the thing. It's got a very inconsistent germination rate. So you want to plant a lot just to put those chances on your side if you are into planting this herb.
Yeah, because we only had one pod with a coriander seed inside, it didn't germinate for us. And so we have no way of knowing how this plant would have done really in our hydroponic system. But I do know that when we tried to transplant, every time we transplanted our cilantro plant from the soil-based tray to pots, it didn't do well. It really does not like being transplanted, it seems. So if you can start it off somewhere where it's going to stay forever, that would be ideal.
Depending on your climate, you're going to want to put it in the full sun area. We're very up north here, so we're going to want a full sunny spot. Maybe if it's a little warmer climate, partial shade would be fine, but needs lots of sun.
Yeah, it did love the sun for us. Because it does bolt so quickly and you want to reduce how quickly it bolts, you might want to put it in partial shade once it has grown up some more if you're in a really hot place. You can apparently also even eat the flowers, the white flowers that it produces, but I personally found that those taste like soap. I do not like the taste of the flowers, but they are technically edible.
And we mean the taste of soap, it actually tastes like soap. It's not good. I must be a common denominator.
Yeah. And so, I mean, that's the thing though. So you want to plant a lot of cilantro because it has a low germination rate. But if you do end up overwhelmed with cilantro, how can you preserve it before it bolts, so it doesn't go to waste? And this can be a bit of a tricky plant to preserve as well. One way I've heard that works well is you can put it in a glass of water in the fridge with a bag on top, and that will help keep it in a moist, humid environment, and it can preserve like that even for a few weeks. I've also heard you can put it in ice cube trays and sort of, create these cilantro bombs of ice that you can then use for guacamole recipes or for stews.
Sounds good for tacos, right?
Yeah, when it's fresh. I mean, we loved eating it on our tacos. And we also made a really great clip of how we collected the coriander seeds at the end of the plant's life. So if your cilantro has bolted, it's not a lost cause. You can still collect the coriander seeds, which are wonderful to use in like curries and different stews and recipes over the winter.
You know what? I want to talk about lavender.
Well, let's do that.
Okay, lavender. Is this a fast plant to grow, Julia?
No.
It takes forever. Okay, the tiny little sprout finally starts after about, 5-6 weeks?
I can't remember the germination rate, but all I know is it takes 2 years for the plant to get to full maturity.
After the entire summer, we started this thing in February. By October, we had a nice lavender plant. Nothing you thought would take, 10 months to grow, right? So very, very, very slow plant to get going, but it's super pretty. It's nice. It smells amazing.
Oh, it smells amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's what is awesome about lavender. It's not just great for cooking or for making all sorts of salves or, soap. You can also just put it anywhere where you want it to smell nice. If you dry the lavender, you can throw it under your pillow, in your shoes. There's just so many great ways to use it in your car.
I've heard some people put it in little porous bags, eh? And it makes a scented piece.
Yep. And I mean, even though we didn't know that lavender takes 2 years to grow, we were able to grow it to a decent size in about 6 months. And we already were able to begin harvesting a very small amount of the plant. And so that wasn't too bad.
Yeah, hoping it's nicely perennial. It's out there buried in the snow right now. So We'll see what comes out.
We'll see if it comes back, next year. And we actually have a great clip about how we preserved our lavender upside down. And so we'll show you that now.
Okay. Strawberries. We grew a certain variety of strawberries. This variety was called the Alexandria Strawberry. So unlike the nice grocery store ones, these are tiny little ones, about the size of a raspberry, actually.
Yeah, they're really, really tiny. They have some pros and cons. One of the pros is they can be grown in pots, which is wonderful if you're in an apartment. They're also awesome for immediate snacking. One of the cons, though, is they don't preserve super great. For example, for freezing, they would do well frozen, but they wouldn't preserve well in the fridge. And for slicing, they're not that great because they'll just kind of disintegrate into mush. And for dipping too, they won't really hold their shape for dipping into chocolate dip, for example. But they are great for immediate snacking and for freezing.
They were delicious. They tasted just like a strawberry, even better because we grew them in the garden. What else? They grew in the hydroponic system very, very well. You got to take them out of the hydroponic system fast though, because their roots start spreading very quickly and they get entangled on each other. So we had to take it out of the hydroponic system after the germination rate was very quick in there and throw it into pots right away. This plant, to make the fruit, it does self-pollinate. However, we recommend you put many of these plants beside each other, because the ones we did on the staircase and we put many, many pots of them, they made a lot more strawberries compared to our biggest, most impressive one that we put in the ideal condition away, and it was on its own, made less strawberries and didn't taste as good as the small ones that we potted together.
No, I think the raised-bed one tasted the best. Those strawberries were the yummiest, remember? But they weren't very many.
They made less of them. Okay,
that's what happened. Yeah, okay. They have a variable germination rate, so 1 to 6 weeks. We had strawberries all different sizes for a long time because they just came up at such different rates. But we really had no problem growing the Alexandria Strawberry. It grew very readily for us. As Thyme mentioned, it does do better maybe in soil than in the hydroponic. It doesn't want to spread sideways, and that's difficult with the hydroponic pod. Yeah. Anything else you want to add, Stephen?
No.
We're moving on to the next plant then. Next, we have Viola.
What to say about this? It's an edible flower. You're limited in the things you do with it. I eat the flower, you throw it in salads, you make smoothies with it, right?
I mean, it is really, really pretty. I love throwing it in salads. It just adds that wow factor when you're bringing the salad to someone's house and there's literally edible flowers in it. It's so pretty. We didn't really have any trouble growing this one. They do have a very long germination rate though. It can take up to 50 days.
Ours didn't take that long though. I think we had 3 plants.
We did, yeah.
Within 2-3 weeks. We didn't have to wait the 50 days. So.
Yeah, but we did have some come up later. So don't give up on your Viola if you are trying to sprout it. Give it a chance because it can take a long time.
It needs a lot of water. The Viola that we put in the hydroponic system, you got to make sure that water level stays high in the hydroponic system, because that's what allows the feeding sponge to feed that seed. The little baby Viola had trouble because the water was low at one point. Keep it up, keep it topped up.
Yeah, we let the water level get too low and the roots couldn't reach it. Of all the other plants, they were fine, but the Viola roots, I guess, were just too short and they couldn't reach the water. So
we'll definitely do that herb again.
Yep, and it has a very neutral taste. If you are concerned about, eating a flower, it has a very neutral taste. You can throw it into salads and it won't really.
It's got a very lettuce feel to it.
Yeah, it doesn't. People won't. It won't be like eating a flower. It just blends in well with everything. You can also put it on desserts. It's really wonderful, not only in salads, but also in drinks, cocktails, desserts. You can also put Viola in ice cubes and make really pretty ice cubes to make more beautiful drinks. There's lots of different uses for this little flower, and they come in different colors. Ours, I think, were just purple, but you can get Viola in different colors.
For those watching this series, at one point you'll see that we had a bonus garden, which was we got a whole bunch of different kind of herbs just to experiment with and threw them in extra trays that we had. We got all our seeds for this bonus garden from one company. Lesson learned, don't put all your eggs in one basket. We had a very, very low germination rate from these particular seeds from this particular company. But we did have a very successful rate on a few of them.
And because this was really bonus herbs, this was, beyond our experiment. So we didn't grow these in the hydroponic system. We only grew them in the seed tray. Not all of those came up. And so we ended up buying some at the garden center as seedlings for those we were not able to germinate. But some of them did come up. Very few, but some did.
We'll go through them quickly.
Yeah. So let's talk about Angelica. Angelica, we only saw it grow very, very little. It has a deep taproot and needs a lot of space, so we put it into a big pot very quickly. But all I can say is that according to our kitty Alfie, who has been in this video, this guy, he's the one, it tastes very yummy as a little seedling. He came around and he ate it.
We managed to save it and regenerate it, and the stem kept going. And he managed to break into the room again, and he ate it once more. And of all the herbs that were there, he ate the Angelica. So,
yeah. So that's all I can really say about it is your cat might want to eat it.
The easiest plant to do was the herb, the mint.
Yes, mint was definitely the easiest.
Oh my God, it grows like a weed. In fact, I think it's actually classified as a type of weed.
It can be invasive in your garden. It can push out other plants.
So you don't put it in your raised bed. You actually have to keep it potted because it's going to take over everything. Super easy. With the rain, the amount of rain we had pretty much watered itself.
Yeah, but also it is a plant that your cats will like. Mint is in the catnip family, and cats are absolutely obsessed with it. So if you are growing your mint, just be really, really careful to keep it up high so your cat can't get to it.
Because it can be toxic to them, unlike catnip itself.
Yeah.
So we keep it in pots, hung up high, kept it out of their reach.
Exactly. And we really loved mint for our mint teas. I also used it in a tofu recipe. It is just it's a really yummy plant. It can also be used in desserts. And it just grows so readily. I mean, it was just, we got like a dozen germinate, I think.
Easy herb to grow.
One more thing about mint. So when it dies back and it does produce the flower heads, you can easily collect the seeds from the flower heads so you can grow mint again next year. And even if you're not planning to grow your mint again, you'll want to cut off those flower heads before they fall in your garden, because then mint will repropagate itself in your lawn or in your garden. And you want to avoid that if you can.
Unless you really like mint and you want it absolutely you want the whole world to be mint, then please.
By all means.
By all means, yeah.
Alrighty, so rosemary.
Rosemary, very low success rate on rosemary. We tried, it's a tropical plant, right? We tried the paper towel method, adding extra heat pads, every little recommended technique to try and grow it. We couldn't get it to germinate. Rosemary was difficult. We ended up buying a rosemary from the store, taking it, planting it ourselves, and we still have this rosemary now. It's lasted almost a year now, and it's growing nicely. Just give it a lot of sun. It's drought tolerant. Don't let it get completely dry, obviously. But
I'm not sure if it's actually difficult to germinate in general, if we just had trouble with it because we got it from that company with the bad germination.
There's bad seeds.
Yeah, but if you are trying to germinate it, I've heard that 27 to 32 Celsius is a really good temperature to germinate it at. That's its preferred germination temperature. And this is a tropical plant, so as soon as it started getting cold outside, we grew ours in a pot so that we could easily bring it indoors throughout the winter and continue benefiting from our fresh rosemary all winter long.
Yeah, that's right. Unlike our other herbs that are very cold hardy, like the parsley right there, buried under snow, rosemary's dying and gone completely in 2 seconds if we do that. So
yeah. You can also dry it upside down and grind it up to store it in spice containers. It does really well dried as well.
Okay. Moving on, probably the one that I thought looked the coolest was sage, right?
Yeah.
I was sage.
Yeah,
that video.
That's right. The infamous sage. It is so beautiful. I mean, even as a baby, I noticed it looked different from all the other
It looks
plants.
like a little dinosaur plant.
Like a little cactus almost, but then it grew into this stunning flower herb with these pink flowers.
With really beautiful wooden branches. Like it's like a little tree.
Yeah, like it really just became so beautiful. And it's apparently really good for pollinators. It's good to have in your garden, and you don't need a huge amount. Although it's so beautiful, you could grow it just for ornamental reasons if you wanted to, but you don't need a huge amount, because even when you're cooking with it, you use a very small amount of leaves, and that was the mistake we made. We made a recipe with it once, and I put way too much, and it just made the recipe far too bitter.
It's got a super strong flavor. It truly is a, seasoning herb.
Yeah. But it's easy to take care of. It prefers slightly drier conditions, not wet or marshy. So if you forget to water it once in a while, it's not the end of the world. When you're at the end of the season, it does produce a lot of seeds, but it can be, if you don't know what you're doing, it can be tricky to collect those seeds, but it's actually really, really easy. You just put the sage upside down in a bag and you shake really hard, and the seeds will scatter to the bottom. And so they're small, and not all the seeds will be fully formed in sage. So you'll want to pick out the best ones to keep. But yeah, you can repropagate your sage fairly easily that way.
I mean, it wasn't all that easy. We had to take it out of the ground, transplant it because we're moving here to this 10-acre property, and then you were able to turn it upside down.
Or you can just cut it. You can cut the stems and turn it upside down as well if you don't want to completely retransplant your plant.
Okay.
Alrighty, chives. I love chives. They're really unique looking. They're very pretty. And they're so easy to propagate. We weren't able to successfully germinate them from the bad batch of seeds we got, so we ended up buying it at the store. But from that big clump of chives you get, you can literally just cut the roots into pieces and divide the plant up into separate pots and give pieces away to your friends and family, and they'll have their own chive plant that they can start with. So in that sense, it's just really easy to share with loved ones as a gift. It has a delicious taste for use in all sorts of recipes. What else can we say about chives?
It's great. It's kind of like hair. You cut it, it grows right back. So you're able to keep harvesting it as long as you don't take, I'd say, don't take 1/2 off away from the land. So you just cut it, it grew right back. I like it. It tastes good. I would definitely do it again. They
call that, I think, the cut and come again method. So you can cut and come again. Really easy to grow. And I found it pretty decorative in the garden too.
When we're saying that they're easy herbs, we're comparing it to something like the basil, which is very finicky, very sensitive. We need to test it in light, out of this condition, add more wind, less wind. Anyways,
and so I think it is a perennial too in our area, so it should potentially come back again next year, which would be pretty exciting. And because we're hoping it'll come back, we didn't get into preserving it. Let's hope it comes back again next year.
Okay. Another herb we did was the curry.
That's right. So the curry, we never got any seeds for this, actually. This was just something I came across at the garden center, and I saw it and I thought, wow, this plant looks so cool. At first I thought it was Indian curry, and then it looked like a winter wonderland plant. It was just so magical looking, and I just had to get it. It smelled like Indian curry. Turns out it is not related to Indian curry. The curry herb is a completely separate plant from Indian curry, and it's not to be confused with Indian curry. Although it smells similar,
it doesn't have the same taste.
It tastes a little bit like Indian curry. My sister took a bite of it and thought it was just like Indian curry.
I thought it tasted more like sage, though, eh?
Yeah, a bit of a sagey taste. And it even produces these beautiful yellow flowers, which are the exact yellow of curry. So it can be very confusing. But I just love this plant. I thought it had such a charm for our little
it's aesthetic, and it was very pretty.
Yeah, and one of the ways we like to use it was to just throw a tiny amount in when you're boiling water with rice, and it'll add just a nice little depth to the flavor of your rice.
Okay.
Something a little extra.
Something else we got was the lemongrass.
Yes, the lemongrass.
Looks exactly like grass. It looks exactly like regular grass, but this one's in a pot and it's called lemongrass.
That's right. It looks just like grass, so it's not particularly special in how it looks, but it has a very distinctive lemon taste, like lemon, like citrus.
It smells really nice. Mm-hmm. The cats love it. The cats were rubbing up against it all the time and chewing it.
They were chewing it and eating it a few times. I read that it's not particularly super poisonous to them, so I wasn't super concerned about that. I was more worried about that the lemongrass plant might not make it if the cats kept chewing it, but it did. It bounced back somehow.
It's a very hardy plant, very easy to grow.
Yeah, we didn't have problems. We didn't germinate from seed. We bought it at the garden center, so we can't speak to how to grow it from seed. And I'm not even sure if it's tropical or if it's hardy in our zone. I have no idea. So
never ran up about it.
We may have killed it out there.
We'll see.
We'll see. If it comes back next year, then we'll know. Now that we're done talking about our bonus garden, we just want to, share a couple of the things we learned along the way making this series.
One thing we learned is that the plants love worm tea and worm castings. We made our own with our own little worm farm here. We made loads of it for all our herbs, and we had a phenomenal growth rate, I think due in part by the very nice fertilization that they got from this tea. You can learn all about making your own worm castings worm tea in this video right here.
That's right. It's really easy to make, and so we encourage you to check that out if it's something that you're going to want to do, continue growing herbs and plants. And this is a very cheap way to have fertilizer on hand, and you can continue making your own practically cost-free. And the second thing we wanted to share in terms of what we learned is that lighting is so important. Often people, when they see a plant's not doing well, they will water it more, thinking that's what will help it. And sometimes that can just make things worse. It can lead to root rot and all sorts of problems if you overwater. More often than not, plants lack light more than water. Now, obviously, if your plant's leaves are drying out and curling, maybe it is in fact water it needs if the soil is bone dry. But often it's light is more of a struggle, especially if you're like us in a northern climate. It can be hard getting enough light. And so this was the first year we bought grow lights, And it was an absolute game changer for our herb growth. We just were able to, we saw so much more vigor in our plants, so much more health and well-being. We no longer had the problem of leggy, weak plants. And, for example, we made an entire separate series on tomatoes and peppers, which we'll link up here as well. And that series, the reason we were so successful with our peppers, I think, is because of the grow lights we had.
They were great grow lights. In fact, once we got one and we loved it so much, we ended up buying like 7.
Yeah, it was kind of expensive.
A great product. I keep them well stored here. They're ready to go in just a couple months when we start going again on the next year's garden.
The next year's garden will be starting probably in a month or two. We'll have to start it pretty soon in the new year. But yeah, if this is something that you plan to grow, you plan to grow plants or herbs indoors frequently year after year, it might be worthwhile investing in grow lights.
When it was time to move to our 10-acre farm, what did we do?
We packed up the earth in your truck and we brought them over. We
literally, everything that wasn't planted, that was in the ground, in our raised beds, we dug up, put into transportable planting pots, and put them in the trailer and brought them over here.
If you've made it this far in this video, we are absolutely amazed. Thank you so much for watching this video and for going on this herb growing journey with us through this series. If you found this series interesting, educational, entertaining, please take a moment to like the video. It'll really help us out. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to our channel. And we'll be documenting the whole process of how we build a 10-acre sustainable homestead on our farm. And we could be more excited for that, really.
And we're still learning ourselves. We're still doing early stages, literature, and practice. If you know tricks and techniques and things that we should know, let us send us a message.
Yeah, you can send us a message or just comment it down below in the comments. We'd love to hear from you and your advice, as we're fairly still new at this. This video will show you how we began sowing the seeds at the very beginning. And then the series continues showing how all of the herbs grew and what we did with them. If you've never grown herbs before, we challenge you to grow your own herbs for the first time. You won't regret it.
Send us pictures.
That's right. Send us pictures and videos, and maybe at one point we'll do a compilation video of all your wonderful gardens, which we would love to see.
Thanks for watching.
Of the microphone system.
This is a test of my voice. I was told that I have the voice of an angel. Hi.
I still have to talk quietly.
We're gonna.
Am I right there?
Herbs. Some herbs have very medicinal purposes, and other herbs accentuate the aroma around you.
And we will show you that clip now of how we collected those coriander seeds.
I thought I was supposed to recreate the clip.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. For over?